I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Afghanistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, may I first of all express our felicitation to Your Excellency and other members of the Bureau for your election, and through you to His Excellency the Prime Minister of Barbados for his unanimous election to the high office of the President of this important global conference. Allow me also to associate myself with the distinguished representatives who have preceded me in conveying the gratitude of my delegation to the government and people of this fascinating island state of Barbados for their generosity and hospitality extended to us here in this attractive and beauteous city of Bridgetown. Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the convening of the Global Conference on Sustainable Development of Small Island Developing States as a direct follow-up of UNCED and Agenda 21 is a manifestation of a meaningful political commitment on the part of the international community in favor of a particularly geographically disadvantaged and vulnerable group of states who are encountered with complex challenges, responding to which are beyond their own capabilities. Mr. President, there are certain principles compiled in a unified document called the Charter of the United Nations, to which we, as members of the organization, have pledged conviction to promote social progress and better standard of life, and to employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all people. On the basis of such a conviction, the international community should consider the problems of small island developing states, which comprise 1/4 of UN membership, as the common problem of all members of the world community. And it is through a just, meaningful, and sincere international cooperation and commitment that we can effectuate a global search for finding answers to their problems. The United Nations General Assembly's decision in the light of the appreciation of particular vulnerabilities of small island developing states by the Rio Conference as one of the major and significant achievements of the United Nations in recent decades exemplifies the critical need for effective and practical measures to be adopted by this conference. Afghanistan's participation in this conference at a time when our nation is in a serious stage of transformation from the phase of foreign invasion to peace and stability and tranquility, demonstrate a conviction on the part of Afghanistan to a critical need for a concerted world action in favor of the sustainable development of small island developing states. We consider this conference to be a momentous occasion for the formulation and adoption of an action program towards reaching the objective, and we are here to have a share in making this significant and important objective realized. Afghanistan, as a least developed country, has many commonalities of problems with a large number of these states. At the same time, being landlocked, our country is also a victim of its geographical location. We share many pains of developmental barriers, such as isolation from market centers, constraints on transportation and communication, weak indigenous technological capacity, etc., with small island developing states. However, the specific problems and vulnerabilities of the small island developing states, which prevent them from making maximum utilization of their land, natural, and human resources and potentialities, for the sustainable development of their countries and their present and future generations exacerbate the above predicaments many of them are faced with as least developed ones. In addition to the above disabilities, there are other critical and captious environmental problems posing imminent danger, not only to the well-being, but even to the very existence of the inhabitants of these island states. Mr. President, ecological vulnerabilities, the adverse impact of potential climate change and sea level rise, the exposure to immediate impacts of an increasing frequency of natural calamities associated with climate change, such as cyclones, storms, and hurricanes, and lack of adequate natural resources are factors that requires international assistance. My delegation attaches particular importance to the role of regional and international actions that would also involve intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations. The Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee for a Framework Convention on Climate Change agreed to a prompt start resolution. This step constitutes a good basis for an action, the implementation of which deserves the priority to be given by the small island developing states. However, providing improved, convenient, and easy access to financial and technical resources for monitoring climate variability and sea level rise, as well as other preventive measures and strategies that create accountable protection against such environmental threats, is also essential for their sustainable development. So the small island developing states, who are extremely vulnerable to natural calamities, cannot easily enhance and develop, and in some cases even create early warning systems without the adequate financial and technological assistance of the international community. We are of the opinion that a mechanism that would evaluate the status of the most vulnerable developing states, first and foremost of the small island developing ones, and ensure the receiving and channeling of the required early warning devices to these needy states under the auspices of the United Nations, probably United Nations Disaster Relief Agency, seems to be lacking. The creation of such a mechanism would certainly enhance the process of equipping the most vulnerable states to natural calamities with such systems in order to effectively reduce the devastation and sufferings of these states from the anger of nature. In this connection, I'd like to say that Afghanistan would submit a specific proposal for the consideration of the forthcoming World Conference on Natural Disaster Reduction to be held next month in Yokohama, Japan. It is our expectation that the small island developing states would make a wider participation to this important event. Mr. President, the lack of environmentally sound and energy-efficient technology towards conserving energy is another problem that requires international assistance. This is especially an acute problem for those island states who happen to be among the least developed. With regard to the role of international organizations and United Nations agencies, it is gratifying to note that the trust funds established as a development planning instrument and assistance modality proved to be functioning effectively. Based on this experience, the identification of more effective development assistance modalities beyond the traditional method of project funding seems to have been recognized. The United Nations Development Program has taken lead in adopting a program approach for development purposes. The important feature of such trust fund modality is that it is designed explicitly to provide the medium to long-term time frame required for achieving sustainable development. It would be more advisable if the least developed among the small island developing states are given priority of consideration in the allocation of assistance from such trust funds. Mr. President, studies indicate that there are two major problem areas in the development planning of small island developing states. First, the lack of adequate capacity for the design and implementation of policies and strategies to meet their particular needs, and secondly, a tendency to depend on external consultants for policy and strategy design particular areas. The first problem has contributed greatly to the lack of a clear and appropriate sustainable macroeconomic development policies and strategies and the macro frameworks of the national plans. The sustainable development of the states in question, a number of whom having recently emerged from colonial governance, also require adequate improvement in their institutional infrastructure for development planning. For the first phase of the development of the economies of the island developing states, investment in the high external economy sector is an urgent requirement. The identification of a sequence of leading economy sectors in the development process would inter alia provide the planners with a clear conceptual framework for appraising the current situation of existing conditions in the economy. In the infrastructure sector, which includes transport and communication and social service sector, including health and education, it is important to coordinate the production capacity with the production needs. Mr. President, the environment dimension of development should be integrated into an overall systematic and comprehensive development planning and management process. In order to have long-term sustainable development promoted, it is required that these states take an objective view of the interaction between the economic and ecological systems. To achieve the same, long-term planning and policy initiation at national levels are required so as to take into account economic, social, demographic, and environmental variables essential to the realization of the sustainable development objectives. The generation of employment opportunities to absorb new labor force in a national plan is a major ambition of macroeconomic planning. Integrated human resources planning involves population planning, employment planning, manpower planning, and educational planning. These plannings that are at the forefront of development planning as its critical significance for sustainable development is becoming increasingly recognized. Similarly important is the Green Plan and its integration into the economic policies. This recognition is an appreciation of the linkages between the socio-economic and ecological systems, which may have a direct impact on the sustainability of development. Mr. President, we are expressing the hope that our endeavor during this important conference would lead to the unanimous adoption of a set of a specific program of action, as well as a declaration, the implementation of which through a sustainable commitment and cooperation would guarantee the present and future generation of these most vulnerable island states from the environmental as well as economic deficiencies and threats and natural calamities. The draft program of action, as well as the recommendation of the group of eminent persons, provides a good basis for this hope to be realized. And Barbados will be remembered as an historic site for the initiation of an effective, coordinated, and concerted global action towards ensuring the sustainable development of the small island developing states. And I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Afghanistan. I now give the floor to the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and I invite the distinguished representative to take the rostrum.